So the other thing you mentioned, different scenarios coming out of a crisis: the U, the L, the V, the W, and so on. What's your opinion on this? And this it's interesting because if we had bought into the stock markets on that little dip in February, that would have been nice, huh?
Yeah, well, I did, at least
nice.
partly, but with a tiny amount of money, but you know, and of course, whenever you do that, you say, "Oh, why didn't I put everything in?" You know.
Yeah.
Anyway, but the other conversation, you know, I literally just had it today, was if you had a portfolio, it would have been up, you know, significantly during 2019, and then it would have dropped 30% during those months.
Mm-hmm.
And now it's 4% up on where it was in October last year or November last year. And so then the question is, you know, how realistic is that everything that's happened? Does that mean that we're slightly better off than we were in October last year? And of course, the answer is no.
Yeah.
But you have this massive government support, and that provides a lot of asset inflation. And there are some businesses like Zoom and Amazon and, you know, technology and medical, which are in fact a lot better off than they were. But obviously everybody else is in a different space. And so my personal view, and you can take this for what you paid for it, is that if there is a psychological bump, and I think hundreds of thousands of people screaming away at each other will create a mini second wave, doesn't have to be a big one, and that will create a market movement, because I think everybody's made that assumption that we're just back to normal. And that's something that reminds them that you know, that there's a problem out there still. I think that will have a big psychological impact. Long term, I don't know. Long term, I still can't believe that the economy, even if there, you know, if there's no second wave, I just don't believe somehow that it's going to go back to where it was. But the market seems to be saying it will.
Yeah. Well,
which is why I'm not a very good investor generally.
Yeah, me neither, actually. I always seem to buy
more Las Vegas real estate. That's what you need.
Yeah. Well, luckily I sold a bunch right before this, so I had properties closing at the end of March, and I'm very happy about that because the real estate market's tanking right now. But so going back to that question, so then what do you think is the scenario coming out of this? The U, the L.
I was trying to avoid having to say because.
Well, we can move on then.
There was a reason why we talked about something else. You know, I have no idea because I think it's too early to say. It's and what I was just talking about says that I suppose that I don't think it's a V. That's the one I don't think it is. I think if you really put a gun to my head, I'd say it's a W. Because you know, we've got this bounce now. I think it's very vulnerable. I think eventually it will go back. So that looks like a W to me. But it may be a square root. You know, it goes down, comes up, then goes down, and then whoosh.
Yeah. So or a VL.
A VL, yeah. Or an LV, Louis Vuitton. No, it's not.
There we go. Interesting. So we talked about leadership a bit in the sense of be a bad leader when things are good and still get by, but in times of crisis, you absolutely need to be a good leader. And where do you think we're going to see that? I mean, obviously the businesses that don't do well, that's going to expose poor leadership. But then there's also different leadership styles that you and I have talked about before. And we often get into this with the evolution of business models from balance sheet centric, product centric, customer centric, relationship centric, and there are concrete management model leadership styles that happen in those. So in a balance sheet centric environment, you find your hierarchical directive leadership style. In product centric, you get to the matrix management model like Citibank and big global organizations, Procter & Gamble, HSBC, they all have that. Then you would get in customer centric, you would get to this kind of collaborative leadership model where they're co-creating and a little bit of entrepreneurial spirit is brought into an organization. And then in the relationship centric, you get this kind of adaptive, decentralized, almost like a network of teams where there isn't a lot of control and leaders are kind of inspirational guides who engage people in a particular movement, and that's how they lead. Obviously, you can't do that in times of crisis because you need to be able to say, hey, sorry, I'm taking the wheel and I'm going to drive for a bit until we get out of this, and then we'll go back to different things. And I think your take on how to use different leadership styles in different scenarios is actually quite interesting.
Yeah, I mean, all boats rise in a high tide. So that's so that's why in a benign environment you really can't see what's behind the leadership. I mean, you can, but it's much more in evidence in a crisis. And actually, I personally suffered from this. When I say I suffered, I had over 14 years, as you say, I was the corporate crisis manager in Citibank worldwide, and I was just simply put from one crisis to another. And tellingly, I was never in any of these roles for more than 18 months to 2 years, because I was brought in as a blunt instrument. My job was to go in and to do what I did without having the relationships with people. And because of the blunt object approach, it was then necessary, once I'd stabilized the situation, that they'd bring in a different style of leader so that the business could then move forward in a sort of normal way. Because the thing that, and by the way, eventually, which we've talked about in other environments, this became a big problem for me because I used my crisis management leadership style in a growth environment, which was Citibank in '95. And it was a real inappropriate style for a different type of role. So I think it is very important to shift into this crisis management leadership style, but it's equally important to shift back into a more normalized approach once the crisis is over. One of the things I've already sort of talked about a bit, which is that inertia is one of the major obstacles that you face as a crisis manager. People want to hang on to their version of reality, the way they were used to it. And your role is to change manage that, to force people, whether they like it or not, to adapt to the new reality, and not just to adapt to it very quickly, so that they react very quickly and hopefully faster than competition. And so whatever your management style was before, you have to shift rather quickly into a more authoritarian, more coercive style of leadership, which may be very uncomfortable for lots of people, but that's the crisis. If you're going to be effective, you have the experience. There's no point in taking this leadership role and then telling everybody to drive off the cliff. So this sort of makes the assumption that the people that you give this authority to have the necessary experience and insight and skill base that they can actually go out and manage through this environment. If they have it, then the whole concept of delegation is also something that you have to look at, because I think of it as the difference between the old style American steering system, where you move the steering wheel and maybe something happens and maybe it doesn't. There's all this play. And in a Formula One steering wheel, which is very small and extremely sensitive as you go around the corners, you move it slightly and the car moves around very, very immediately, because it's very connected in terms of the responsiveness of the car to the steering wheel. And that's what you need in your, funnily enough, steering committees, where what you're doing is you're bringing in the essential elements of your organization, you're putting it into a small team, and you're getting that team to meet daily, and you're getting that team to respond immediately to your sense of direction. So if they don't, if you have any sloppiness and you're not checking that the organization's responding, then there's the danger that you're not being quick enough, and you're not being accurate enough, and you're in an environment that demands both speed and accuracy.